Right. Thank you for letting me watch that class. That was really,
welcome.
really interesting and fun. And I learned so much about genetics and how to organize a class. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So how do you think it went?
Based on the sentence strips that they produced and the half sheets of papers of patterns, it's exactly kind of what I wanted them to see. That just because parents might have something, children may not. It may skip generations. So all those things that we were aiming for, that really what Mendel discovered for us, they started to hit on. Great. So I was happy.
So all the things that you wanted them to learn, you were hearing evidence that they were on path for that.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of students who were a little bit, maybe not as far as the others, but yeah, definitely.
So thinking of that, one of the things I was, I don't know your kids at all. So if this is your room, so here's the front where we are, and here's kind of the back. Where were those kids that you were?
So there's two right here that's worried about. And there's one or two right about here that's worried about as well.
Okay, and what was catching your attention, or what were you wondering about with those guys?
Body language in general. Well, with this kid, it's sort of, he has a bunch going on outside of school. He was actually in my shape class before. He got kicked out of shape. So he's in this class. And, we're always trying to invite him in to participate. But he's semi-interested, but there are things kind of preventing him, I think, personally, from being there. I think Gio, he was over here. He started sketching because I think his team ran ahead of him.
Okay.
And they didn't slow down to include him. Here we have Dylan. He's very bright, but hesitant to do much. So he sort of takes it in, then goes home, produces the work, and brings it back. And sometimes, most days, he's kind of hesitant to interact. And I'm not quite sure what that's about, but we've had talks here and there, but he's kind of a very private person.
Okay.
Lucas, he's not interested so much in school right now, and I think he has a lot of stuff going on with his family, and it's just, he again has the capacity, because I've seen it feels like he's one of those kids that's taking it in but doesn't really want to show it, because he does show it on tests.
Okay, interesting. So in addition to, kind of thinking about the things you wanted the students to learn, you were also wondering, and on your mind, how the groups worked. So what was your thought about how the groups went today?
Well, they were chattier than normal.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of their interactions. Well, actually, I probably rephrase that. So a couple weeks ago, they were so quiet. Every time I encouraged them to talk, they'd get extra quiet. It's like silent defiance or something. They're rebelling quietly. But
was that before spring break? Was that the dragging into spring break?
That was the dragging into spring break. But I kept kind of chipping away at it. And these last 3 activities, I've seen them be a little bit chattier. And so I was surprised with the level of communication going on. But it does seem to be fitting in the pattern of what's been happening the last couple of activities. But it's definitely improved from before spring break.
Do you think there's something about the activities, or something about the expectation, or something about the practice? How do you perceive the uptrend?
I'm seeing that I think they're more comfortable with the people they're sitting with, because we keep sort of chipping away at being more comfortable with each other with silly brain breaks. I also think that the activity has to be conducive for conversation. It's something that's kind of hard to do on your own. And then I'm expecting them to produce something. And so that sort of makes them, because of that accountability, makes them okay, I got to get involved here.
Nice. How long have they been in these groups or teams?
Now it's spring break, so about 3 weeks.
Okay, and they've been in other teams before?
They rotate. Not a lot, but yeah, they've been in maybe about 4 other teams before. And then
did you do anything deliberate to form the teams, trying to get this outcome, based on what you'd seen before?
Yeah, I usually try to, I'm thinking about the teams and thinking about leaders, people who will, include or be more inclusive, especially the kids that are not wanting to participate, and who I've seen have chemistry with, the ones that are reluctant, but they seem to open up with certain people. So kind of placements in that respect.
Nice. So again, me not knowing your kids, like, you know, can you talk through like where some of those placements or choices were, some of those kind of kids who you're perceiving as leaders to welcome others in?
Right. So for example, student here, he has huge issues with depression. And I wanted to put him in a group that was going to be gentle and sort of give him space, but also, just use kind words and be compassionate. And so I placed him with the team members that I know are my sweethearts. Then I've got, this person over here who gives a lot of nonsense, but I've got him with kids who don't like taking nonsense, but will do it in a funny way where they'll push back, but since he likes them, he's cool with it. Okay. So that kind of relationship works fine.
Who is the kid in the popsicle shirt?
That would be Frankie.
Yeah.
Yeah, she would be like, all right, well, I'm going to take in charge, and I don't want that nonsense. And so I'll put him right there with that kid.
She was definitely a team captain in that group.
She's the team captain in all of her teams.
Definitely had some leadership behaviors. That was a deliberate pairing to like get the boy under the leadership of someone who's going to make things really clear.
Yeah.
Good. Any other kind of deliberate groupings?
Yeah. Over here is two of my more like autistic kids, although I think one is undiagnosed and the other is, and with a really strong, again, kind personality. They're really good in terms of cognitive ability, but they have some quirks, and I think that they understand and work together really well. Okay. It's like this, they don't have...
it was an interesting team for me to watch, too. I was trying to figure out exactly what was going on there. So
and the other person in there is, she's strong in terms of being able to get...
This kid?
Yes. Yeah. To work down. She's on it. So, and the other kids are willing to work, but they need someone to herd them.
That's great. So as you were planning this and you had an idea of how it was going to go, and then once it starts, the class is running, and you're seeing how it's going, were there any adjustments or shifts or changes you made on the fly today?
Yeah, one of the handouts didn't copy well. Not sure what happened there. So, I had to get a whole new set of handouts for those groups. But the other thing was everything seemed to be working well. There was one or two teams where one of the kids looked like, I don't know what this is.
And where were they?
So this group right here, this student, Penny right here, was just like, like deer caught in headlights sort of look. And there's one that was just sort of charging ahead. So we had to pause there and be like, so Penny, tell me a little bit more about this here. Do you remember, the legend? What are the circles? What are squares? Some very basics to help her in and just sort of help the other girl who's like, well, this is the, just sort of push her back a little bit and suggest like, well, why don't you maybe label them? It might help you figure that out a little bit better. And you guys give them the task. Why don't you label? Why don't you tell her what to do? So just sort of break it down in little tasks so that it becomes easier to digest for Penny.
That's great. Anything else? Any other shifts you made?
I was looking at time. First period, it took a much longer to do this, but I could see that these guys get it, but they're taking a bit more time to set up. So just wanted to shorten the time of the task. So they just sort of keep moving because it wasn't a problem about I don't understand what I'm doing. I'm just taking forever doing it.
Right. I saw you do the time check and you're asking for 10 minutes. You're saying, how about we do 5? Because that's really all they needed.
Right. So, that's all they needed.
That's great. So you had asked me to look for kind of group behaviors, so like individual and group behaviors that were kind of leading to that cohesion. And some of my observations were really lined up with what you're saying, like the task. There were lots of dimensions to it. There was kind of a lot to make sense of out of the reading. So as they made sense of it together, they were all checking in and asking each other questions, some groups more vocally than others. When you asked them to, get going, there was a lot of just like quiet and social leadership as they went and got the resources they needed. So whether it was just like a little small interaction as they got the whiteboards down and people offering to help each other, or the kid who's in the front of the room, he said, was in your shape class, like I was wondering how he was going to participate because his demeanor is that he wasn't going to participate at all. But when I observed him really carefully, he was attentive throughout the entire day. Like he was really leaned in, he was plugged in. So even though he was quiet and reserved, he wasn't checked out at all. So that was kind of interesting. And he would do things to help the group, like he went and got the marker, kind of he was pointing a few things out, but he was participating, but not necessarily leading. But he wasn't checked out at all.
Right. I've learned to sort of not over push him because that's kind of what I've seen. Because at first,
I saw you invite him in.
Yeah.
I saw you make the step to invite him in to be one of the number people, and he was like, he wasn't going to do it. He didn't push it too far, but like there was definitely a deliberate invitation. I saw that as well. You had also asked. So there was that. One question I had is at these two tables, you had a louder and more social group kind of in the middle of the table, which when I was observing it had a good effect because these guys at the end were very quiet getting started, but there was definitely some interplay here that as this task was really talking through what they were doing, I saw this group kind of pick up some of the same steps. So I was wondering if it was deliberate to have those kind of chattier groups in the middle because it seemed like it paid off.
That's exactly sort of what I try to put. Like these two are very quiet. They talk to each other, but it's not in any way as friendly as here. So, and I also tried to make sure that these teams can lean in on these other guys and these other guys because they can be pulled in other directions and then come back to their work and feel fine. Yeah,
I definitely saw that. So that was absolutely happening, whether you were at the table or your back was turned or whatever. That was definitely happening. You had also asked me to kind of pay attention to that, like, how are kids and groups doing when you weren't right with them. And like 95% of the time, like they were all on their task, they were all in. It didn't matter if you were nearby or far away. They were handling their own problems and their own questions. One exception was this group in the back, these three. When she was out for a while, these two were not doing any of the tasks. They weren't goofing off. They were working on other work for this class, but they weren't on the task at all. When she came back, she got back on task, which kind of, I think that those two put a social pressure on him. This guy is, he's a performance on tasker. So like he's off task quite a bit, but he performs on task for you when you're nearby.
Yes. So he's also on the spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah, and
he's very social.
He is, and it varies from day to day. Some days he'll have great days, some days he'll have not so great days. But I do remember Rhea came in. What they started to do was work on the assignment from yesterday. They hadn't finished.
Okay.
So that she was working on it too. So I asked her to I'm glad you're trying to get that done, but I think it's kind of important that you keep focused on what's going on right now, or else you'll be sort of lost later. So I asked her to put that away, and hopefully that's what got those.
They did, and then they got really, it went really quick. So out of 30-something kids, having only one who needs the kind of extra attention from the teacher to be motivated and do that, like that's a remarkable statement to like the habits, routines, relationships, and just like the way you structured the work, because there was enough interesting things that they were focused on that they didn't have to be showing off for the teacher to be engaged. So, so that was interesting to me. The other thing is I spent some, these guys were quiet, they were working really quietly. Everybody was participating. So that was an interesting thing. Like the group next to them, they were participating by talking it through. This group was participating by kind of everybody was working on the board, but quietly. So I was kind of curious how that was going. So this was a group I spent some time asking them, what they were doing, what they were working on, why. Every kid in the group was able to explain what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how they were doing it. Without exception. Like everybody knew. Like they were, because I said, like I'm a history teacher. I don't really know this science stuff. Like, what are you doing? What are these squares and boxes? And talked all through, like, well, how come this one is this way? And they're like, well, in the data. So anyway, universally in that group, they were all able to say what, why, and how. And I sampled a couple of other kids. This kid, and not the really quiet one, but next to him, and someone else. Oh, and these two. And all of them were able to explain what they were doing.
Wow.
I didn't really ask. You'd asked me to find out or, kind of investigate if they were interested in the lesson. I didn't feel like I needed to ask that question because they were all leaned in. They were all engaged. They were all trying to figure it out. They were all explaining it to each other. So it was self-evident.
We should use it again, maybe? Or do you think it was just for this particular group? Like this assignment in general, do you think it's something that's got good teeth for?
I think so. I mean, it seemed, for me, the whole day had a really nice flow to it. You know better how it feels, and, you teach it more than once, so you have a sense. But there was a good mystery to it. You had a nice way of weaving it in with the things they'd learned before and the things that they're going to talk about later. I don't have enough window on that to know how impactful it is, but it seemed like it was really well set up. I also really like the GLAD strategies that you were doing, like with the moving in the beginning. Do you do that every class?
I do, depending on so some units more, some units less. The words are like pretty straightforward. Others where I know that they're going to, from previous experiences, that I feel like, they're going to need some backup here, then I use the GLAD strategies.
So just, what I was observing with that was maybe half of the kids were actually doing the movement.
Yeah.
Probably about 75% of the kids, including the ones who were moving, were watching and paying attention. And about 25% of the kids were just listening.
Yeah.
They weren't doing something else.
Right.
So they didn't give an appearance that they weren't hearing it, but they weren't
actively doing it. Yeah, they're some of them are a little bit more socially conscious about how they look in class than others of them. So, as long as they're sort of writing it down on their CCD chart, then I don't push that either. I'm okay with, all right, I got it here or I got it here. But this is just more like an additional tool to help you get it.
Okay. So one of the things I'm curious about is, like, on the group work, it's clear you've done a lot to, like, set up an ethos in the class of caring. At the very end, I saw you going around and just having some social check-in time with a couple of kids. 5 out of the 9 groups were using that time at the end of class to, like, talk to each other and chat. Yeah. 4 kind of weren't. They were on tap. They were doing the reading, maybe as a way to avoid talking to each other. But 5 out of the 9 were, like, chatting with each other. Some of it was social, some of it was about the work. But, kind of for that cohesion and that student interaction that was happening. Throughout the year, I'm wondering, like, what kinds of coaching or instruction do you give them about how to work in a group?
So it varies. Some of them are more like emotional things, where we write certain things down and we just share like what we're thinking, just so that we can see, reflect, our feelings reflected in other people, and understand that even those persons, maybe I have some ideas about this person, hearing their voice, so that we can have equal respect. We've talked about the norms of collaboration. We have built our own norms before. We built our own kind of rules and community stuff, like what they expect from themselves and me and each other. We've talked about what is it that teams kind of do to stay on task, and individuals stay on task, and so this is just throughout, kind of little things throughout the year. We do like team cheers and so little things, scratch the surface, fun things, and then deeper things as well.
Do you think it's been paying off?
I think it took a long time, and
I saw lots of evidence of those things today.
Eventually, it's paying off. Some people got there quicker than other people, but at least I think everybody feels comfortable in the classroom, and that's my first thing, that they feel comfortable and they don't feel like they feel like they're in a safe place, and they can they can either dive in or, work kind of the way they do without feeling like they have to act one way or the other.
Yeah, I definitely saw lots of evidence of that. So, just on reflecting on the lesson, the time of year, what's coming next, I saw a lot of strengths in this. I'm wondering, are there more things that you want to explore or think about or improve related to this? And is there anything I can do to help with that?
Yeah, I am running out of time, and there's a lot more in this this segment, but I need to kind of hit evolution before the end of the year because it's such a big, important thing. So I am trying to see where can I shave down, little segues, or are there things that I can shave down because I'd like for early in the year to save a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm.
But we spend a lot of time doing these team building things, this community stuff, and I have a really hard time finding this balance of where can I cut back in the bit more closer to the beginning of the year so that I have more than just 3 weeks to do the rest of my stuff.
So maybe in a separate conversation, we could kind of look at a map of the whole year, and you're so reflective. I think just maybe talking it through, you would probably find your own answers, but I'd be happy to help you think it through. Just another reflection I have is that you were so deft at building in so many strategies to support individuals, to support groups, to support inquiry, to kind of live up to NGSS. You had asked about that balance between teacher time and student time. It was about 90% of the kids making sense of things on their own and about maybe 10% teacher time. And it's going to sound weird, but in a lot of regards, the students didn't need you at this time of year. And I think people would perceive that as well, then what? What
do you do? Yeah, what do you do?
What's she doing here? But it was a great testament. They had the materials, they had the resources, they had the relationships, so they could answer most of their own questions individually or through a team. And it made me think of an iceberg where you were 10% of the kind of action today. Students were doing 90% of the work, but I imagine that 10% that I saw from you today was the tip of an enormous iceberg with a bunch of planning and thoughts and care and attention going into thinking about how all the activities would go today, which is why the students didn't need so much of you and they were able to do so much on their own today. So I know we've talked about it in the past, but kind of part of what your journey on developing as an educator is your leadership and your ability to share and mentor with others. So I'm going to keep this in mind when I see other teachers and they're just you should go watch this Living Earth class because there's some really neat things happening there. So
thank you.
Yeah.
It's not always great, some things flop because it's just that era trying new things and some things just fly in my face and it's oh my god.
So that even on days when things like that happen, you're very reflective about it. So it's not just despair or
tiny bit of despair
or blaming. It's never a kind of a blaming situation. It's always thinking, okay, how did that go? What can I learn from that? And I think that's really important for people to learn too. That here you are, so long into your career, you're still taking chances, trying things out, testing things, making them better. So I think it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if there's anything else I can do for you or anything else you ever want me to come back in and look for,
awesome.
Happy to do it. So thank you so much.
I'm just passing by. Hello.